This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 187 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Today's topic is historical connections and travel. I have interviews with two guests who have really fascinating historical connections, either through ancestry or simply through the coincidence of meeting someone connected to history. And they're just great stories. I thought it's a good time to have just some fascinating stories while we can't travel during COVID-19 times. So I hope you find them as interesting as I do. I have to admit I have no fascinating or even vaguely fascinating historical connections to travel myself. My dad actually has this great document of family history that someone in our family researched, and I'll often it's many pages long and quite unwieldy to figure out what's going on, but I'll often flip through it and try and I'm always looking in vain for a really intriguing historical connection. And honestly, we've got a not very exciting past. The one I always remember is just one of my ancestors, quite a few generations back, who had an embarrassing death because it's recorded in history that he died falling off the back of a cart, a horse and cart, while he was lighting his pipe. So, oops. See, smoking is quite dangerous. Anyway, I have no good historical connections with travel in any way, but fortunately I have guests who do. So my first guest today is Flip Byrnes. She's a travel journalist who's Australian but currently based in Germany. I've known Flip a few years, and I vaguely knew that she had this really kind of interesting pedigree, but until we got on a call and actually started recording, I didn't quite realise how deep it went. So she is actually the great-granddaughter of Frank Hurley, who was a very important member of Ernest Shackleton's expedition to Antarctica, among many other things. But anyway, Flip and I chat about her historical connections with travel.
When Shackleton went to get help and did another crossing from Elephant Island to South Georgia, Elephant Island was a stepping stone on their way to South Georgia, where they got saved by a whaling station. And he set off, just four of them, and he said, I should be back. Don't know if I will be. And the rest of them lived under a lifeboat for, a few months. And apparently in Hurley's chronicles, that's when things got really grim for those guys. It all been fun and games while they were trapped on the ice floes, racing their dogs before they ate them. That was another story. But when they got to South Georgia, they were stuck on a tiny beach and it got grim, and quite a few of them started to get really, really sick. And the last thing that Hurley did before Shackleton left was make him sign over the rights to the photos. So as the ship was going down, Hurley had taken all of the photos on glass plates, and he was diving into the sinking wreckage to rescue these glass plates. And then they went through the glass plates, himself and Shackleton, and selected which ones they would keep and carry, in these lifeboats. And Shackleton smashed the rest to stop Hurley from going back to get them, because he knew that he'd go back and get them.
Wow.
And so when he took off for South Georgia, the last thing that Hurley did was, make him sign over the rights, thinking if he never comes back and we do get saved, or if we do get saved regardless, this whole trip pinges on these images. And they did. The only reason that you know about Shackleton and that people know about this expedition is because it's visually recorded. So those glass plates were the key to absolutely everything. And they were some of the first, some photos had come out of Antarctica, but these were the first really serious lot of photos. And it's what made Shackleton famous, and it's what, really put this trip on the map, because for the first time people had footage and they could see vision of it. So managing personalities and in that kind of environment, Shackleton just must have been quite a man, really quite a man.
I can't imagine the levels of extremes that they're operating under. And, it's 100 plus years ago. It's we can't even begin to imagine how how cut off and distant that is, and it's unbelievable.
I know, no $4,000 insurance to call on a satellite phone for a helicopter.
No.
Like you're out there. Everyone thought that they were dead. I mean, when he turned up at the whaling station, he opened the door and the whalemaster and captain just looked down. He said, I'm Shackleton of the Endurance Expedition. And he just went, we all thought that you died a year ago. Like, stunned.
Wow.
Stunned. And then they had to go back and rescue everyone back off Elephant Island again. And they almost didn't make it because winter was coming, the ice was coming in. They had 3 attempts, each time the ice closed it. And so I know, just a gripping story. But you also just don't know how people behave in those situations. You take a normal, logical person, put them on an ice floe on a sinking ship and row them halfway across the ocean in southern waters for a year. And, people might start to show some interesting personality traits. And to keep that in check as a leader is, a masterful thing to have done.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So if I did do another trip, the one that I've really got my eye on is that crossing from when they landed at South Georgia. It's got a topography which isn't unlike Nepal in that it's got lots of really tall mountains on it, which are all glaciated, covered, so lots of crevasses. And they landed on the wrong side of it. And then from the boat, they put nails into their shoes to make kind of crampons and did this crossing of an uncharted thing. Again, should have died many times by falling into crevasses, didn't. But that is the trip that I would like to do because his crossing of South Georgia is ultimately what saved my great-grandfather. And without that successful crossing and all the other bits, but I really see it as this crossing, I myself wouldn't be here today. Yeah. So I would love to recreate that just to know what they went through and what this last bit of this tale needed to happen in order to have resolution and save the lives of the whole crew. So, that would be my next trip that I'd love to do.
Yeah, wow, that would be amazing. Yeah. I mean, all of this kind of travel is incredible enough, but when you can link it back to, this is your family history, that's just very special, I think.
Yeah, well, that's really all it is. I mean, that's how it started. So I never knew about Frank Hurley and my Antarctic trips. There had been in the corridor to the bathroom a black and white photo of a ship that was sinking and it was being crushed by ice. And so I must have walked past it every day. And it wasn't until I went to do my journalism that my grandma, his daughter, said, oh, just like my dad, I was going to do journalism and photojournalism. And he said, did you know that my dad was a photojournalist? I said, oh, really? And she said, yes, he did that photo that's in the bathroom corridor.
Hang on, no one thought to tell you this your whole life until you're at university.
No one told me. No one. But I know, like Antarctic and Shackleton nuts would just die.
I can't believe it.
I know, my family's so relaxed. We've got a very relaxed family. But you know what? I still didn't get it. I thought, oh, that's great. I've got a journalism link in my ancestry. Isn't that nice? And then it wasn't until a few years after that Hillary, so Edmund Hillary, was giving a talk on Frank Hurley at Sydney University because Frank Hurley, it turns out, was his hero. So we thought we should go to it. So, off we went and, listened to this talk and it was amazing. And then this is what it took for me to understand my ancestry. And then afterwards we sat down to have lunch and it was him, his wife, Frank's daughter, my grandma, my mum and me. So 3 generations of Hurley women and Mr. and Mrs. Edmund. Hillary, and he said, okay, so what do you know about your great-grandfather? And I said, really not much. And he goes, well, how about I tell you why he's my hero? And so it took for Sir Edmund Hillary, who's the great man himself, when he talks, you listen. And finally the penny dropped.
Oh, wow.
Finally the penny dropped. And then I started my own journey in the snow world and in the snow industry. And then he just kept popping up more and more, and I started to get more and more interested. And then it got to a point where I had enough of my own skills that a South Pole trip wasn't really
impossible.
Such a massive leap of faith. Yeah, it was something that potentially could be possible. And then I got interested in all the different sides of him. Like he went to he lived with a Bedouin for quite an amount of time. It wasn't just Antarctic photography that he did. He did World War II photography, lots of things in Papua New Guinea, lots of things in the Middle East. And so I ended up in Petra, where he did a lot of photography and took photos, recreated his photo positions 100 years later of photos that he'd taken.
Wonderful.
I ended up at the Scott Polar Institute in Cambridge, looking through the diaries to try and figure out what their planned route was to the South Pole. I ended up in Christchurch at their museum, where they've got a few things, and then artifacts of his, and then he just kept popping up in places, like just when I'd start to get distracted from my track or think that everything was too hard with following this Frank journey, and it went on for a good 8 years, I think. I was changing planes in Barcelona on my way to somewhere and stepped out of the plane, and there in front of me was a poster and it said Hurley exhibition. And I was like, what? And so I didn't get on my connecting flight because I just had hand luggage, and I just walked out the airport and went to, I can't remember where I was going. I think it was somewhere else in Spain, maybe Seville. And went and jumped in a taxi and went and found this exhibition. And it was a lot of the Hurley photos that I'd recognised, a really good curation of some various ones of his.
Oh my God.
And I was trying to tell the people, that's my great-grandfather. Yeah. And they were just like, no. And I'm like, no, it's
really?
It really is. So, it keeps popping up. And the last one, it's usually in airports, was in Frankfurt Airport. And I was going through duty free, and there was one of his pictures again. The night ship was the one that was being used, and an iconic one. And it was a point of sale for whiskey. There was some whiskey distillery that had got hold of this photo, but it was huge, covered an entire wall. And that's the photo that I have the original of in my room.
Oh,
so wow. So I'm trying to tell this random whiskey seller that this is a iconic photo of Antarctica, and I've got the original because my great-grandfather took it, and you can just see people just looking in, just going,
you're a bit nuts.
Yeah. Whatever.
That's funny.
So it seems like just when I get off the Hurley path, something always pops up to bring me back to him. And what was the nice thing was that I hadn't been that close to my grandma and her twin sister, Aunt Adley, because they lived in Coffs Harbour, and we were in Sydney. And I started interviewing Adley about Frank Hurley and what she remembered of him and what he was like and what her thoughts of that trip had been, until she dropped the bombshell that she had been Australia's first female press photographer. And it happened in conversation like this. So, so when I was, as Australia's first female press photographer, everyone just assumed that Frank had taught me, photography. And I was like, hang on.
Go back a bit, yeah.
Rewind. Bring it back. Bring it back, Aunt Adley. What do you mean? And she goes, oh, yes, I was Australia's first female press photographer. I was like, how have I never heard this? And she started the Telegraph way before any other female started in their photography department, and to the point where there was no female toilets on the photography floor. And that was the reason that they wouldn't give her a full-time position, because they said we don't have the facilities, which suited her just fine because she got paid more as a freelancer than the guys did who were on staff. So she was fine.
Best of both worlds.
About that. Best of both worlds. They used to call her front page Hurley because she had so many front pages, and you should have seen her. She was the most stylish, most beautiful. She was a model before she was a photographer.
Wow.
And I just can't imagine her sashaying into those heavily male-dominated areas and then just getting all the scoops, and there's pictures of her busting some drug den down in Haymarket, and she's climbing a ladder in her high heels with her box brownie or whatever it was, the big black ones with the snap-closed cameras. She did amazing things, Aunt Adley. So while, the journey started off to find out about Frank, in the course of it, I discovered my Aunt Adley. And that was she, because Frank is someone I never met, whereas Adley was a real living example and role model for me. And so when I crossed Greenland, my sled was called the Adley.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful.
So Adley came with me.
So there you go. That is quite some set of historical connections. My favourite part of the story is that Flip spent her whole childhood into early adulthood knowing nothing of this, that it didn't seem important enough to bring up in the family at all. Maybe it gives me hope. Maybe I might be in my 40s, but maybe there's someone in my family who's just failed to tell me about an amazing historical connection. I can live in hope. Anyway, my next guest today is Tom Mattson. And Tom is widely travelled, has written some amazing stuff about his travels. And this story is about a connection to none other than Fidel Castro. So let Tom tell you the story.
Probably right now my most favorite place in the world to travel, and it has been for some years, is Cuba. I've been going there almost every year since 2004. Early on, I heard that there is a place to go in the mountains called La Comandancia, or the command post of Fidel Castro when he was fighting against the dictator Batista in the late 1950s. But I didn't know how to get up to the mountains to go to that Comandancia, and it took me a couple of years to figure out. I finally figured it out, and I ended up in a little village of Santo Domingo. It's along the river Yara. And I toured up higher up in the mountains and found Fidel's cabin with white, beautiful sheets on the cabin and a trap door so that if the enemy troops came in and approached, he could sneak through the trap door and go down the mountains the other way.
Wow.
I've told people several times that I've been just dying for a chance to spend a day or maybe a week in Fidel Castro's cabin, but I doubt that anybody in the world will ever do that again. Those clean sheets will not be ruffled. Well, down the hill in Santo Domingo, I was swimming in the River Yara, and there was a young brother and sister and other local kids swimming, and I talked to the Miguel, the boy, and he said that his grandfather knows a lot about the revolution and lived in Santo Domingo during the revolution. So he invited me over to their house one night, and I sat on the dirt at a table on a dirt floor kitchen in that home. And that older man's name is Juan Gonzalez Castillo. He just turned 70 years old. At the time of the intense fighting in Santo Domingo, he was 8 years old, not quite 9. And over the next few years, he then told me some stories. And I said, Juan, has anybody ever interviewed you about your eyewitness to the revolution memories? And he said, no. I said, I want to get you interviewed. And so I told him, and with his approval, I thought of different ways, including trying to get University of Havana students in conjunction with American university students and a tripod and a video camera and sound equipment to interview Juan Gonzalez Castillo. But that was going to be an insurmountable project, and I found out after a couple of years. And 2 years ago, I told Juan, I will do it myself. So I bought a small iPhone, which was a couple of years out of date, but takes great photos, pictures, videos, and sound. And in April of 2019, when I went on my annual visit to Santo Domingo, Juan and I sat down in the doorway to his house, and his son, who's a guide up to the command post, was a translator, speaks fluent English.
Perfect.
His son is Miguel too, and it was the little boy Miguel, the grandson, who told me about this in the first place. So we talked for an hour a day for 3 or 4 days in the doorway, and I had a list of questions. how did Fidel Castro, when they infiltrated the Sierra Maestra Mountains, how did they win over the farm workers? I mean, the farmers, the campesinos. Were they suspicious? And so he explained how Fidel had an amazing personality and a commitment and a motivation to help the people. The Cubans at that time were impoverished. There was a wealthy class and the other class. And as far as education and healthcare, there was so little of it, especially for the rural people. So they began to embrace the revolution. And I asked other questions. I was wondering, Juan, did Fidel Castro ever stay overnight in your house in Santo Domingo? And I asked him that because Fidel and other revolutionaries met frequently in his grandfather Lucas's house.
Wow.
When Juan was 8 years old. He lived with his grandfather, Lucas. Lucas had a wonderful farm with coffee and root vegetables and fruit and rice, everything that the revolutionaries could use. And they could also find ways to get medical supplies and some ammunition up to the command post by mules at nighttime, because the Batista's Air Force would be circling the Santo Domingo, and they would be bombing, and they would look for anything that moved. But Fidel came to Lucas's house where Juan watched them, and Juan said, yes, one day his grandparents fixed up the nicest bedroom in the house, and Fidel Castro slept overnight.
Oh, wow.
And he did it more than once.
That's amazing.
And yes. And I said, did you ever meet Che Guevara? And he explained how Che came to the house on more than one occasion, and how Che devised a new type of a Molotov cocktail that would fire out of a rifle. And they test fired that from right outside the family home, the Lucas and the boy Juan's home. Juan was 8 years old, and Fidel was here, and Che was 2 feet away.
Wow.
And they fired it, and it threw the Molotov cocktail hundreds of feet. It blasted against a hill and exploded. And Fidel Castro and Che and all the adults were clapping and whooping it up. And so Juan said, then I knew that was a successful test. I was happy too. So I interviewed Juan Gonzalez Castillo, and I also wandered through the house with my video camera rolling. I was following Maria, Juan's wife, around from the backyard, getting freshly crushed and ground coffee beans that she had roasted already over an open fire. And now she took the ground coffee to the kitchen and made coffee for everybody. So I took a lot of the video. I'm in the process of putting that into a micro documentary. I have promised Juan's family I'm coming back there with a DVD, because they want this to show, to preserve for the family, for the generations. And I also plan to stop at the University of Havana History Department, because I have a contact for a history professor who would very much like to have this little documentary of an eyewitness to the Cuban Revolution.
Wow, what an amazing find to be able to meet a guy like that and to hear those stories. It's really living history, isn't it?
Yes, a friend of mine, a poet, a friend of mine, Andy Anderson, told me, he lives in Oregon. He said, Tom, you have to get this recorded before it's too late. And now Juan is now 70. He's going to live a bunch of years yet, I think, because he is healthy. We could not start recording till late afternoon. He's a farmer, and he wouldn't come in for recording sessions to his house until late afternoon. Right. So I don't, we did it before it's too late. Maybe it's good that I got it done before it's too late, that I could not be a camera operator.
Yeah.
So,
that's amazing.
Well, that's in Santo Domingo, in the Sierra Maestra of Cuba.
Wow. That's incredible, isn't it? To be able to, to fathom that people, actually experience, this part of history so vividly and have those stories to tell. That's fabulous. And it goes to show it's well worth getting into conversation with local people when you're traveling, because you never know what you're going to discover.
Yes. And by great fortune, he has a fantastic memory. He remembers so many details, and some that his son Miguel, the translator for us, the son Miguel's lived there all of his life, and a few of those things he did not hear before.
Oh,
so
wow.
he learned too. Even the family learned.
I particularly love that Tom showing an interest in this story meant that all of the family around Juan got to hear about it as well. I had a similar scenario in Cambodia a couple of years back, where a woman that the company I was working with had been working with for many years was finally ready to talk about her experience under the Khmer Rouge. And she explained the story, and her daughters got to hear it for the first time. So sometimes you just need someone else, sometimes an outsider perhaps, to want to know a story, and that can help us learn more and be able to pass those historical stories down. So thank you very much for listening to episode 187 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. I hope that these historical connections have been as interesting to you as they have to me. Big thank you to our guests today. So first up, I chatted with travel journalist Flip Byrnes. Her best way to find her is on Instagram at The Adventure Mama. And also a big thanks to Tom Mattson. You can read more about Tom, find books and so on at tomsglobe.com. Now, if you have any historical connections to travel, met someone interesting, related to someone interesting, then come along and tell us in the Facebook group. Just look up Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook, or there's a link in the show notes. Show notes for this episode are at notaballerina.com/187. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.